Hi, my name is Ryan Langwish, and this is Ludo Lodge, a channel about sparking growth in your journey as a game designer. Today I'm going to be continuing my series on nanDECK, which is a great tool for game designers to create cards in, specifically creating cards from spreadsheet data. And today I'm going to be taking a look at how to add icons into your nanDECK cards. Both icons kind of in a row of icons, as well as icons within text. If you're completely new to nanDECK, I recommend starting with my introductory video, which I'll link up above, somewhere up above. And I have a couple other nanDECK videos that you may be interested in. They're all on a playlist that is linked in the description below. But if you have watched some of those other videos, what you're seeing here, once again, it probably looks somewhat familiar because I'm working from the same example where we have these cards, and this is an example of one that we just had an arbitrary kind of name and cost, a picture, and some text. And these aren't from a particular game. It's me just, putting the most generic game information into my examples. And so what we're looking to do here is first to add a row of icons. So basically to the right of this text up here, I'm going to want to put some little icons. Maybe these cards are multi-use cards that at some point you could discard for those icons, or maybe those are resources I need to spend to play the card or something. I don't know. But I'm going to put little icons that are on each card up to the right here. And then the second thing we're going to look at is having icons within the text. And this is very common when there's like a resource or something in the game that's really represented by an icon and not necessarily a word. And so in your text, you want to say, gain one of that icon and not spelling out the word. And it just looks nice and it is very readable and kind of a more visually pleasing. So we're going to take a look at how to do that. So before I get much further here in nanDECK, let's jump over into my Google spreadsheet to take a look at some of the changes I made there. So the first thing that you might notice that is different is I've added a new column here called icons. And in this icons column, each row, which each row is a card, has a combination of capital letters. FW, and then this one has FWL. What these letters are representing in my spreadsheet data are each letter is corresponding to an icon that I want that card to have. In this case, my icons that I'm going to be using are fire, water, and lightning. And you can guess which capital letter stands for which. And some of these are going to have multiple ones, some of them are just going to have one. But that's what it's going to look like on the spreadsheet side. In nanDECK, it's going to then be able to recognize those and convert those into the icons. Now, the icons are just a single letter here. That technically isn't a constraint. Really, the only constraint is that they all have to be the same number of letters. And you can, so if I would recommend using one letter unless you maybe have so many of them that it's going to be hard to, use all the different letters, or it's just going to be clear. Maybe if you use 2 letters as the key, you'll just have to specify that in the nanDECK directive. So that's the first piece here. The second thing that's a little different is in my descriptions, I've added a little bit to the descriptions for this example. And you'll notice that I have things like gain 1, and then I put water in parentheses. For the purposes of putting icons in text, I'm going to need some sort of key that I'm going to substitute for the icon. This is really just a personal preference thing, but in my games, I've typically used just parentheses around the word, mostly because it's very unlikely I'm going to want to put parentheses around the word without putting the icon in. So you want something that's not going to be duplicated in the text because it's going to substitute every one of them out with an icon. And so you can see I did that here with water, fire, and lightning. And that's what it's going to look like in my text. Is anywhere I want that icon to be, I'm just going to put that text with the parentheses. But again, you wouldn't have to have it be parentheses. It could literally be whatever key you want that it's going to substitute. I think that's just a good way to make sure that it's kind of unique. You'll notice another thing here is this little tag. Now, if you are at all familiar with HTML, you'll recognize that as a break tag in HTML. And that's going to get into kind of, once we're in nanDECK, how we end up getting icons in our text is by using what's called HTML text instead of simply the text directive. And that doesn't just give us the ability to do icons. It actually opens it wide open to all HTML directives that you might be using, or HTML tags. So in this instance, a break tag is just going to give me a new line. And so that's an easy way for me to kind of separate the second action of this card onto a new line. But it also means I could do things like make a word bold. Like if I surrounded gain with a B and then a closing B tag, that's going to make gain in bold in the text. So that gives you some flexibility to kind of make your text look a little more dynamic. We're not going to worry about some of those other things right now, but that is what this break tag is doing here. So that's pretty much all the changes here. I have already downloaded this back to my computer to load into nanDECK. So let's jump back there and see what it's like loading it in. So if we jump here to the beginning card, we see as it exists today, we haven't put any of the nanDECK code to handle icons. So there's no icons up here, and you can see that our text is just literally putting that text in. It's putting the break tag and it's putting the water text as is. So first we're going to want to look at how do we get some icons up in the top right here. Now the first thing we need to tell nanDECK is what icon should each letter be assigned to. You remember we have the F icon, the W, and L for fire, water, lightning. We need to assign those to images. And we're going to do that by using the icon directive. Now you'll remember in previous tutorials we pretty much did everything within the visual editor, which then threw it in these visual tags. You could do this kind of stuff in the visual editor as well. It can get a little wonky because as you're changing parameters in the visual editor, it's kind of constantly validating, and that sometimes causes it to say you have invalid data when really you just haven't finished entering the data. So I like to define this separately. So I'm just going to have a comment here, icons, and this is where I'm going to define all my icons. And the way I'm going to do that is by using the icon directive, which you'll notice brings up this here. For the range, I'm just not going to use a value, which is just going to default to being the whole range. In this case, it doesn't matter. Then we're going to have key, and so this is me telling nanDECK what letter is this icon assigned to. So let's do F first, which is going to be our fire. And lastly, we want an image file. So I put all the images, I just grabbed some nice images off of gameicons.net, and I put them in the same directory as this text file. And so since it's in the same directory, I can just put the name of it. And you'll notice the second I finished the name, my image appeared here. And so that's kind of like confirmation that you know you have the file path right, is you'll see nanDECK recognize the image. And that's all we need here, is we've now told nanDECK, hey, we have an icon. Whenever we have F, we want it to be the fire image. So naturally, we want to do that for the other two icons. So we're going to copy those. We're going to do this to get my water image, which is a little droplet. And we're going to do L to get lightning, which is this nice lightning symbol. So those are our icons. Now we need to actually put a place on our card that's going to display those icons. For that, I actually am going to go into the visual editor because it'll just be a little easier to arrange it. So we want to put it kind of to the right of this attack text. So first, we're going to want to make that text smaller. So if I come and find that, I can kind of pull it over like this. And we're probably going to have to reduce the font size. Now, right now, this font is being used by both of these texts. In fact, all of this text is inheriting this font because it's just executing from top to bottom. So whenever it gets a text, it's just using the last font that was set. So we're actually going to want to duplicate this because I want my number to still be big, which I think is this, I guess it's the second one. So I'm going to move this text up so that I have just my big font and my number. But then I'm going to duplicate my font and I'm going to pull that above my title text. And if I right click into that font, I can just change the font size. Let's maybe do 16. It seems reasonable. So now we've got kind of a smaller thing there. So hopefully all of our different ones will still fit within here. We could actually toggle through here and check. I don't think I have very long names. Potion, retrieve. Okay, those all look good. So now we have this space available here for icons. In fact, I might even bump this over just a little bit more. These aren't going to be like the best laid out cards, but again, a lot of the times that you're doing this kind of stuff in nanDECK, it's for prototyping, right? Where you're trying to just get something to the table quickly. Later on, when you are very confident in how the game is looking, you might come back and really tweak it to look nice and polished. But word of advice, I wouldn't spend too much time doing that on your early iterations of the game, or you're just going to waste a lot of work when you realize that things need to change. So now we have this spot available here. We want to put in icons, which, you guessed it, we're going to use the icons directive. So if I click icons here, it's going to throw an icons directive, which is a big black rectangle right now. So we're going to drag that around to position it to where we're going to want our icons. So roughly in here, something like this. And then let's right click into icons so we can change some of the properties. So the range should be fine here. Keys here, this is us telling this icons directive what column in the spreadsheet should it be getting its values from. So if we double click here, we can get a list. It'll show us all our columns, and it's just pulling that from the spreadsheet that we're linked to. And I want to do icons, and it'll actually show me here, like these are the icons that are associated with all the different cards. And so if I insert that, you'll actually notice it immediately throws this in here. And if we confirm and go through these, we actually are going to see them there. Now there's going to be some tweaking we want to do here, but that in and of itself got this to kind of work, right? Like we're seeing it show all the icons for each one of them. And it's recognizing those icons because we defined above our visual block, which is important. Icons need to be defined first. We defined what each letter corresponded to. So let's go back into the icons and see if we can make this just look a little better. And actually, let me go to the last one because it shows 3, so that'll be a little easier to maybe visualize what's going to look good. So this position is just how I dragged the box around in the visual editor. So usually I just drag in the visual editor. Object width and object height here is going to be really defining how big our icons are going to be. So right now it's saying like 5% of the card for the width and 5% is the height. And that's actually why right now they look skewed, right? They look more tall than they are wide. And that's because we're taking 5% of the width and 5% of the height, but these aren't square cards. So 5% of each of those is actually just like proportional to the dimensions of the card. The way we're going to fix that, or the easiest way to fix that, I mean, you certainly could try to figure out exactly the proportional percentages that would make it square. The much easier way is to add the P flag for proportional. So if I click this, you'll notice it immediately locked it in to be squares. And that means that these don't need to be exactly right. It's going to always maintain the icons being proportional, which is almost always, I think, what you would want. Depending on what you're doing, maybe you would want them to skew, but typically you're probably going to want them to be proportional. So now I can play with these numbers a little bit to see. Okay, so that's really big. And you wouldn't have to be working in a percentage either. So let's see, 0.2, 0.2. Okay, that was weird. So that's actually looking kind of nice there. I don't remember what values I used when I was playing around with this before. I may have used percentages. But this is looking decent here. Angle would be if we wanted them to rotate or something. I don't think we really care about a lot of the rest of this. I suppose horizontal alignment might come into play. If I wanted it so like let's say if we looked right now, if I toggle through these, right now it's centering them. So there's just a single one, it's going to show it in the center of this box, whereas 2 is centered and 3 is centered. It might look a little better if it always right justified it, so that if it's 1, it's always up against the side. So that's easy to do with the horizontal alignment. We can just set that to right, and then maybe we want to pull this in just a little bit so it just looks nicer. And so you kind of go through and it's like, okay, do we like where that's at? Maybe we want it to be over a little bit. It looks like it's kind of crowding that. Until you're happy with where your icons are showing up. nanDECK is lagging on me here. Okay, and it's like, okay, that looks pretty nice. And that's pretty much it for getting icons in. Now I could certainly get into the details of every, parameter that you could be changing with icons to make this look different. It'll actually wrap. So like if the values don't fit in the box, so like there were too many icons to fit in what I've defined as the box, it'll bump down and do another line, which might be desirable depending on what you're doing. And there's a bunch of other options here. Great reminder is that the nanDECK manual has tons of good information, and it's hot linked here with this help. So if you open this, it's literally just going to tell you all about the icons directive. And it's going to tell you, here's what every parameter does. Here's what, you know, some examples of what you might do. So that's very helpful if you're kind of confused of like, well, what happens if I change this? But for our purposes, this has pretty much accomplished what we want. You know, if I was prototyping and just wanting to test this game, that gives me all the information functionally to be able to test it. So part 2, we want this text to look better. One, we want the HTML tags to actually, you know, be used. But secondly, we want the icons to show up here. Now what we're going to have to do is we actually have to define these icons again, because once we change it to use HTML text, and here, let's actually validate and build our deck so we can see our updated versions. Once we're using HTML text doesn't reference these icons. This icon directive really corresponds to the icons directive that we were using, whereas HTML text is going to be looking for HTML images. And so we're actually going to have to define these again using the HTML image directive. But it's going to be a very, very similar concept here. We don't care about the range. And for the key, this is basically the same concept as the letter being the key here. But as you remember in our spreadsheet, we use the parentheses with the word. So this doesn't have to be a single character. They don't all have to be the same length. The reason these need to be the same length is because we're defining the list of icons as a single word. And so nanDECK needs to know, like, how do I chunk that word? Am I taking an icon per letter, an icon per every 2 letters? Whereas here, what nanDECK's going to do when it does HTML text is it's just going to, anytime it sees a substring of that text that matches what we've defined as an HTML image key, it's going to just hot swap it. It's going to say, oh, that text doesn't go in there. Instead, this image goes in there. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to say fire, because remember that was what we did for our fire image. And then we need an image file, which we're just going to use exactly the same image as, keep misspelling that, same image as before for our fire. But then the other thing we're going to want to define here is we're going to want to do a width and height that's going to, you know, be good with our text size, which I think 0.2 is actually going to be reasonable. Lastly, there's the flag parameter that's saying any of these are valid flags. We're going to use the same flag we were using in the icons directive, which is P for proportional. So that's just going to ensure that it always keeps it proportional to the image that we're importing. So now we want to do that 2 more times. Bloop, bloop. We want water. Water.png. Oops. Okay. Yeah, I always want to see it down here to make sure it's actually loading it. Lightning. Got lightning.png. So now we have these available. And so now whenever we use HTML text, that HTML text is going to be looking for kind of these keywords to do hot substitution out. So now that we've got that, let's go back into our visual editor. And we want to replace this text. So we're no longer going to have a text directive because text is always just going to print plain text without any of this kind of dynamic showing of icons or HTML or whatever. So we're actually just going to delete this. We don't need it. Are you sure? I am sure. And we're going to want to put in HTML text, which is here. So as usual, it's going to throw this in as a really big box. I'm going to drag it to what I want it to be, which, you know, is roughly kind of in here with some margins, something like that. And then we're going to want to right click into here, and the text right now is just literally putting in HTML text, but we want to use the description from our spreadsheet. So if we double click here, we get all of our columns from our spreadsheet. We select description, we see all the, you know, all the descriptions that it's recognizing in the file, and we're going to insert that. And you'll notice it's like totally working. Deal 15 damage, and this says gain 1 water droplet. And that's because in our description, we had parentheses water. HTML text recognizes that key and switches it with what we've defined as an HTML image. So let's actually see here if I confirm and step through these. So we have duplicates of a bunch of these cards. So we have like 5 attacks. So defend, block 6 damage, gain 1 fire. You can tell I spent a lot of quality time on these descriptions. approximately like 15 seconds. Hero 5 HP, gain 1 lightning bolt for each enemy. And there's some things you can do, like as far as like the spacing of these, you can kind of play with the size of the icon, or maybe the image you import is cropped a little bit more aggressively so that it really kind of tightens it up. This actually doesn't look too bad. It's pretty readable. And I don't think this last one had any in the text. But there you go. Just like that, we have our icons that are showing up here. And so the icons directive is really good for when you want to show like a group of icons together, and there may be a different amount of those icons, or there maybe is only ever one icon. That's really good for that. And then if you ever want to have icons in text, HTML text is your way to go. You can see the line break is working as well. It's automatically bumping this down. You could also do things like throw in bold tags or italicize tags. So it's pretty nice. It's pretty dynamic. You could even, I think, play around with coloring of text. It's literally rendering HTML at this point. And so if we confirm this, we come out, we validate our deck. It's going to ask if I want to enable Explorer 11 for HTML text. I don't know exactly what that means. I think it's determining like what engine it's using to render the HTML. I'm going to say no. It still says my deck is valid. And I'm going to generate these, and it looks like they're all good here. It's a little bit not as clean here. If I go into card preview, it's going to be huge. But this just shows you, like, they are high resolution. Like when I actually go to print these guys, we have this nice deal 15 damage, gain 1 water droplet. Very nice. Well, there you go. Hopefully that gives you everything you need to want to add icons in or add icons into text. As I mentioned earlier, if you ever have any questions beyond what I had in the video, your best bet first is to look at the nanDECK manual, because it is comprehensive. It really tells you most of the things you would want to know. But if you have other things that you want to ask specifically about this video, leave them down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. Consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.